The grocery bags cut into my palms as I pushed open the front door. I could feel the sharp edges of the handles digging into my skin, a burning ache that spread up my arms. My fingers were trembling by the time I set them down on the counter. Almond milk, olive oil, crackers, I could list them in my sleep. I had worked 10 hours without lunch, finished late, and still went to the store because my mother said she could not do without those crackers. It would have been easier to go home empty-handed, but easier was never allowed in this house. The hallway smelled of fried onions, heavy and cloying. Underneath, I caught the artificial bite of floor cleaner, a chemical scent that always reminded me of hospitals. My shoes squeaked against the tile as if announcing me. No one looked up. The television flickered from the living room, its sound low but insistent, and I could hear Ethan's laughter drifting through. I wanted to resent that laugh, but it came so easily to him. Everything came easily to him. My wrists throbbed. I exhaled slowly, long and heavy, the kind of breath that comes only when you have been carrying weight far longer than you should. The kitchen light buzzed overhead, a constant hum as if it too was tired. Then my father's voice sliced through the silence. "Did you get my message?" I turned halfway, already bracing myself. "About what?" He walked into the kitchen, arms crossed tightly, jaw locked. His expression was carved into something severe, something unyielding, the kind of expression that once made me apologize before I even knew what I had done wrong. "Your mother and I have been talking," he said. His voice was calm but sharp, every word honed like a blade. "If you cannot contribute more, maybe you do not belong here at all." The words landed like stones. For a moment I thought I had misheard him. Contribute more? How much more was there to give? "I already cover the mortgage," I said quietly, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Utilities, groceries, almost everything." From the living room, without looking away from the television, Ethan called out, "She acts like she's doing us a favor or something." The laughter that followed from the screen made me want to smash the remote. My grip tightened around the edge of the bag until I thought the box of crackers might tear through. My pocket pressed against the folded receipt, its numbers imprinted in my mind, $1,648, money that vanished every month into the abyss of this house. "I am not acting," I said, my voice even but cold. "I have been doing." My father's eyes narrowed. "Don't get dramatic." My mother appeared then, filling the doorway, arms crossed, mouth tight. Her body language mirrored his as if they had rehearsed it, as if I were the intruder in my own life. "We just want everyone to do their part," she said. "I have done more than my part," I whispered, her head tilted. "Then why does it still feel like you are holding back?" Something inside me hardened. My chest was heavy, stone pressing against my ribs. The bag slipped from my hands onto the counter, a dull thud against the laminate. The crackers shifted, but I didn't care. "I just got off work," I said. My voice came out low, deliberate. "But fine, you want more, I will give you something." They stared at me like I was about to break. Maybe they thought I would scream, maybe they thought I would cry, but I didn't. I walked to the door, opened it, let the night air rush in. Before stepping out, I turned just enough to say, softly, "Then this house no longer has a daughter named Juliet." The silence behind me was suffocating. My footsteps echoed down the stairwell, each one carrying me further from the role I had been cast into without consent. My hands shook as I reached the street, the cool night air pressing against my skin. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the rows of dark houses, the lamplight staining the pavement yellow. I should have felt guilty. That was the rhythm of my life, guilt, sacrifice, repeat. But instead there was only stillness. Not peace exactly, but stillness. I walked slowly down the block, no destination in mind. My chest was tight but lighter than it had been in years. I kept thinking of the number on that receipt, the ledger of my existence in this house. No matter what I gave, it was never enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I ignored it. I wandered until the house disappeared from view. Past closed shops, past shuttered cafes, past windows glowing with scenes that did not belong to me. Families gathered around dinner tables, friends leaning close over wine glasses, couples laughing at something only they understood. Through glass, I watched lives that felt like fiction. My own home had never looked like that. There was no laughter, no closeness, no warmth, only demands, only expectation, only the constant silence of disapproval. By the time I reached the river, my legs were trembling. I sat on a bench under a flickering streetlight. The water rippled with reflections of gold and silver, breaking them into pieces. I pulled the receipt from my pocket, unfolded it, and stared at the number again. 1,648. It wasn't the amount itself. It was the symbol of it, the proof that my worth had been measured in dollars and not in love. The paper crumpled in my fist. I wanted to throw it into the river, but I didn't. I needed to hold it to see it, to remind myself this was real, that I wasn't imagining the weight crushing me. My phone buzzed again. I pulled it out. 15 messages, 3 missed calls from Dad, 5 from Mom, 7 from Ethan. I opened the first. Dad, call your mother. The second. Mom, Juliet, please do not do this. We just need to talk. We love you. The third. Ethan, you're seriously leaving over nothing? Grow up. I closed the phone, placed it face down on the bench. The river kept moving. The city kept breathing. And for the first time in years, I realized I didn't have to respond. No obligation at all. I sat on the bench until my legs grew stiff and the night thinned into something fragile. The air had cooled, brushing against my face, numbing the skin of my hands where the bag handles had bitten deep. My fingers still bore the red grooves, temporary scars that looked like a map of what I carried. I traced them absently, wondering if they would fade by morning, if the weight of my family would ever fade from me at all. The phone buzzed again. I didn't move. I watched the river instead, its surface folding and unfolding under the breeze. I had always liked water because it never asked anything of me. It moved without demand. It carried its own weight. No one ever accused a river of not giving enough. A memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 16 again, standing in line at the grocery store with my first paycheck folded into my pocket. Mom had forgotten to pay the utility bill. She said the lights would be cut if it wasn't taken care of. I remember her face, the practiced sadness in her eyes when she told me, "You're such a good girl. You'll always take care of us." At the time, it felt like a blessing. I was proud. I handed over part of my paycheck, and when the lights stayed on, I felt powerful. But sitting on that bench now, I realized it had been a chain. That sentence became prophecy. By 25, I was covering the Wi-Fi, the water, most of the groceries. By 28, I was sending money for Dad's prescriptions and paying Ethan's overdraft fees. Every request was dressed as necessity, every thank you thinner than tissue paper. And when they didn't even bother to thank me, I told myself love didn't need gratitude, that it was enough to be dependable. I laughed bitterly, the sound startling in the empty night. Dependable, as if being the net that caught every fall was the same as being loved. The phone lit up again, its screen glowing with their names. I let it buzz until it went still. The stillness was different from silence. Silence waited for me to fill it. Stillness accepted me as I was. I got up and started walking again. The city had quieted, the streets mostly empty except for the occasional car that swept past in a blur of headlights. The shops were dark, their windows reflecting my shape as I moved. In each reflection, I looked smaller, almost ghost-like, as if I were dissolving into the night. I thought about turning back. There was still time. I could walk into the house, apologize, take my place at the counter like I always did. I could smooth the edges of tonight into something forgivable. That was what they expected of me, but my feet didn't turn. They carried me forward block after block until I stood in front of a small cafe I sometimes passed on my way to work. The lights inside were dim but still on. Chairs stacked on tables, counters wiped down. Behind the glass, I saw a barista sweeping the floor. She glanced up and caught my eye. For a moment, I wondered if she saw me clearly or if I looked like just another restless stranger haunting the night. I turned away. I wasn't ready to be seen. When I finally reached my apartment, the hour was close to 2 in the morning. The building was quiet, the hallway dim, the carpet worn thin in places. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space smelled faintly of lavender from the candle I had burned last week. The air was still, expectant. I dropped my bag on the floor and stood in the middle of the room, unsure what to do. The walls were beige, the kind of color no one remembers choosing. The furniture was minimal, the result of moving in with only 2 suitcases and a bookshelf I had assembled alone. There were no family photos, no heirlooms, nothing that tied me to anyone else. For years I had thought of this absence as loneliness. Tonight, it felt like air. I made tea without thinking. The kettle hissed, the water poured, the steam curled into the silence. I carried the mug to my small table and sat, staring at the spreadsheet pinned above my desk. Every line of it was a memory disguised as numbers: utilities, groceries, car repairs, credit card minimums, Ethan's therapy bills that I hadn't known I was still paying. $18,426 in less than a year. I sipped my tea and let the bitterness rest on my tongue. They didn't see me as a daughter. They saw me as coverage. The thought should have broken me. Instead, it steadied me. My phone rang again. The sound pierced the apartment, too loud, too demanding. I let it go to voicemail. The silence afterward wrapped around me like a blanket. I thought of my father's face when he said maybe I didn't belong. He had meant it as a punishment, but the words had opened something in me. If I didn't belong there, maybe I belonged somewhere else. Maybe belonging wasn't tied to blood or obligation. Maybe it was something I could choose. The idea was terrifying. And yet, as I sat there with tea warming my hands, it felt possible. I went to the window and looked out. The street below was empty, a single streetlight casting a pale circle on the sidewalk. In the distance, I could hear the hum of the city, a reminder that life kept moving no matter who I chose to stop saving. For years, I had told myself that stepping away would be betrayal. But betrayal was giving everything and being treated as though it was nothing. Betrayal was being turned into a bank instead of a daughter. I pressed my forehead against the glass, cool and grounding. My reflection looked back at me, tired but still here. I whispered to it, "You're allowed." The words felt strange in my mouth, but I said them again, louder. "You're allowed." Allowed to rest. Allowed to stop. Allowed to be more than a ledger of other people's needs. For the first time in years, I believed it. That night, I slept. Not the fractured kind of sleep I had known for so long, waking at every buzz of my phone, every thought of what bill was due next. This sleep was whole. 8 hours without interruption. When I woke, sunlight was spilling across the floor, and my body felt heavy in a way that meant rest, not exhaustion. The phone was silent. I didn't rush to check it. I stretched, made coffee, opened the window to let the cool morning air drift in. The city smelled different in the morning, cleaner somehow, like everything had been reset overnight. I sat at the table, sipping coffee, watching a sparrow hop along the windowsill. It pecked at something invisible, then flew away unbothered. I envied it the way it simply existed without explanation. I picked up my phone at last, 30 new messages. I scrolled without reading. Words blurred together, selfish, ungrateful, dramatic. I locked the phone again. I had nothing to say. By the afternoon, I decided to take a walk. I put on my sneakers, slipped my wallet into my bag, and stepped outside. The sky was a pale blue, streaked with clouds like brushstrokes. The breeze carried the faint scent of bread from the bakery down the street. I walked with no destination. My steps were slow at first, then steadier, until I found myself in a part of the city I rarely visited. A small park opened in front of me, its grass dotted with children playing, couples lounging, a man tossing a ball for his dog. I sat on a bench and watched. The laughter of strangers filled the air, light and unburdened. No one here knew me. No one expected anything from me. I was invisible, and it was a relief. For years, invisibility had felt like rejection. Now it felt like freedom. I closed my eyes and tilted my face toward the sun. Warmth spread across my skin, and for a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a life that was mine. The park air smelled of grass and faint traces of grilled food from a vendor nearby. Children's laughter rang out like tiny bells, sharp and pure, carrying none of the heaviness I had left behind. A girl in a yellow dress chased a bubble that drifted across the lawn, her parents watching with smiles soft as sunlight. The bubble popped and she laughed even harder, as if loss itself were nothing more than a game. I tried to remember if I had ever laughed like that as a child. My mind drifted, searching for a memory, but what surfaced instead was the image of me standing in our kitchen at 13, balancing a checkbook while my parents argued in the next room. I had learned too early that stability wasn't something we had, it was something I had to manufacture. I didn't chase bubbles. I chased due dates. A breeze stirred the branches above me, scattering small leaves onto the path. I brushed one off my lap and thought of Ethan. He had been 12 when he begged for the newest gaming console. I was 19, working at the grocery store and taking classes at night. He whined until my mother sighed and looked at me the way she always did when she wanted something done without asking directly. A quiet plea laced with guilt. "You know how important it is for him to fit in at school," she had said. So I bought the console. The memory still stung, not because of the money, but because of the way Ethan had hugged the box and said, "Thanks, Mom," as if it had been her sacrifice, not mine. I blinked and came back to the park. A man jogged past, earbuds in, sweat glistening on his forehead. The ordinariness of it all felt foreign. People around me lived lives that didn't revolve around plugging holes in a sinking ship. They weren't holding up the weight of a collapsing house on their shoulders. They were just living. The thought was almost unbearable. I left the park and wandered toward the market district. Shops lined the street, their windows filled with displays meant to tempt passersby. A boutique showcased soft leather shoes in warm tones of brown and beige. For a moment, I lingered at the glass. My own shoes were scuffed, the soles thin from years of use. I thought about going inside, but guilt tightened in my stomach like a fist. I couldn't spend on myself. Not when there were bills to cover. Not when every dollar had a claim stamped on it before it even reached my account. Except this time, there weren't. Not anymore. The realization startled me. I stepped back from the window, heart racing. The absence of obligation felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. Freedom and danger inseparable. I kept walking, unable to face the weight of that possibility yet. By the time I returned home, evening shadows stretched long across the pavement. My apartment was quiet, the kind of quiet that once felt suffocating but now soothed me. I dropped my bag on the floor and sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun lazily overhead. The phone lit up again. This time I answered. Finally, Ethan's voice snapped. "Do you know what you've done?" I stayed silent. "You think you can just walk out and everything will be fine? We needed that money. We counted on it." My silence stretched. "God, you think you're better than us just because you've got your little apartment and your stupid spreadsheets." His words dripped with contempt. I didn't reply. He hung up with a scoff. The line went dead. I set the phone aside. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. Later that night, I opened my laptop and logged into the public property portal. I typed in the address of the house I had grown up in, the house I had just walked away from. Pre-foreclosure. Final notice issued. The words glowed on the screen. I stared at them for a long moment, waiting for panic to rise, for guilt to flood in, but nothing came. My heart didn't drop. My hands didn't shake. I had been sending $1,300 a month for nearly a year, sometimes more. I had never seen the actual mortgage statement. They had never offered to show it. I had thought I was keeping the house standing. I had thought I was preventing collapse, but the truth was clear now. The money hadn't gone where I believed. It had gone elsewhere. I closed the tab. I didn't need details. The truth was enough. They hadn't needed a daughter. They had needed a system, and that system had just broken. I poured myself a glass of water and sat on the floor beside my small table. The apartment hummed with quiet, no interruptions, no demands. I looked at the spreadsheet taped above my desk. I didn't need to read it anymore. I didn't need to tally the sacrifices to prove I wasn't imagining them. The silence itself was proof. They would scramble now. They would blame me, guilt me, twist my absence into selfishness. But I wasn't part of their structure anymore. I wasn't the safety net. I wasn't the silent donor. I was simply gone. The phone buzzed again. Mom this time. I let it ring until it stopped. I sat there until the glass was empty, until the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. My shoulders eased, muscles loosening in a way I hadn't felt in years. Stillness seeped into me. It wasn't silence waiting to be filled. It was space, space that belonged to me. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. Morning came with pale sunlight spilling through the blinds. I stretched, bones creaking, body heavy with rest. I had slept through the night again. My phone blinked with new messages, but I didn't open them. I brewed coffee, toasted bread, and ate slowly, savoring the luxury of not rushing to work, not calculating in my head what payment was due next. I sat by the window, notebook open. My pen hovered over the page before I finally wrote one line. Some stories are better closed. The words steadied me. I carried my notebook to the small kitchen table and sat down with my coffee. The apartment smelled faintly of toasted bread and fresh grounds. The scent was simple, almost fragile, but it filled the space with a warmth I hadn't realized I had been starving for. I flipped back a few pages in the notebook. Lists scrawled in messy handwriting filled the lines. Groceries to pick up, deadlines to meet, bills to cover. Every list had been for someone else. My life had been an endless ledger of obligations. Now, staring at the blank page, I realized I could make a different kind of list. I wrote, 1. Sleep 8 hours. 2. Cook a meal just for me. 3. Walk without checking my phone. 4. Buy something I want, not something I need. The simplicity of the list made me laugh softly, though the sound came out strange, rusty. It had been years since I had written anything that wasn't tied to responsibility. Years since I had given myself permission to want. I tapped the pen against the paper. The question whispered in my mind, what would happen if I actually followed this list? The phone buzzed across the table, skittering slightly against the wood. I glanced at it but didn't pick it up. The name glowing on the screen was Dad. Again. For years, that name had been enough to make my stomach knot, my pulse quicken, my body brace for impact. A demand, a rebuke, a reminder, tonight's bills, tomorrow's errands. Another emergency that wasn't mine. Now I let it ring until it silenced itself. I lifted my coffee instead, warm ceramic against my hands, and sipped slowly. The silence that followed wasn't waiting. It was simply present. Later, I walked to the corner store. The afternoon was bright. the sidewalks alive with people carrying shopping bags, kids riding scooters, an old man leaning on his cane as he crossed the street. The ordinariness of it made me ache. I wanted to sink into it, to belong to a life where every step wasn't weighed down by someone else's need. Inside the store, I wandered the aisles with no list in hand, no text from my mother buzzing in my pocket with requests. I picked up a jar of herbal tea, sniffed its soft scent of chamomile, and placed it in my basket. Then I saw a bar of dark chocolate, the kind I used to love but had stopped buying because it was too indulgent. I added it without hesitation. At the register, I paid with cash. No guilt, no hesitation, no math running in the back of my mind. The receipt was short, unburdened. Walking home with the small bag, I realized my shoulders felt lighter. Back in the apartment, I boiled water, steeped the tea, and sat by the window with my chocolate. The taste was rich, slightly bitter, melting slowly on my tongue. I closed my eyes and savored it. For years, every bite I ate had been swallowed in a rush, meals eaten in a haze between work and family obligations. This time, I lingered. The tea cooled in my hands, its steam curling upward. I breathed it in and thought about the night before, about the words I had spoken. Then this house no longer has a daughter named Juliet. They had left my mouth like smoke, unexpected and unstoppable. I hadn't planned to say them. I hadn't even known they lived inside me until that moment. But now they circled back, echoing in the quiet of this room, and they felt true. As dusk crept across the sky, I lit a candle on the table. Its flame flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the walls. I curled up on the couch, notebook in my lap. I added another line to my list. 5, remember this feeling, because I knew the calls would keep coming. The messages would grow sharper, more desperate. They would twist my absence into betrayal, into selfishness. They would try to pull me back with guilt strong enough to choke me, but I wanted to remember this. The taste of chocolate, the glow of a candle, the stillness of a room that belonged only to me. This wasn't abandonment. This was survival. The night stretched quiet around me. I read until my eyes grew heavy, the book slipping from my hands as sleep pulled me under. And when I woke, sunlight warmed my face and my phone, lying silent on the table, looked smaller somehow. Less like a chain, more like a tool I could choose to use or ignore. I poured myself another cup of tea and opened the window. The city breathed in the distance, steady and unbothered. For the first time in years, so did I thought again of the river, its current carrying pieces of light across the surface. I thought of the bubble popping in the park, the little girl laughing as though nothing had been lost at all. Maybe loss wasn't always an ending. Maybe sometimes it was a beginning. I leaned against the windowsill and whispered to myself, "You're allowed." And in that moment, I believed it. The next morning was quieter than I expected. I thought I would wake to pounding on my door, to angry voicemails filling the air, to the kind of panic that had always followed whenever I disappointed them. Instead, the silence stretched wide, a quiet that felt both fragile and firm, like glass that might shatter but hadn't yet. I lay there in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the fan. For the first time, my body did not tense at the thought of someone barging in. No footsteps, no knocking, no demands, just stillness. I should have felt guilty, I told myself, but guilt didn't come, not in the way it used to. What I felt instead was a cautious sense of relief, like stepping onto ice and realizing it holds. I rose slowly, my movements deliberate, savoring the morning. I brewed coffee and sat at the small table by the window. My notebook lay open where I had left it, yesterday's list staring back at me. I read the lines again, sleep 8 hours. Cook a meal just for me. Walk without checking my phone. Buy something I want, not something I need. Remember this feeling. I touched the words with my fingertip, almost as if tracing them would bind them into reality. They looked simple, almost childish. But each one carried a weight, a quiet rebellion against the years of servitude disguised as duty. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed on the counter. I turned it face down. The vibrations stopped, then started again. Finally, I stood and walked to it, not because I wanted to answer, but because I wanted to see how far they would go. 37 missed messages since last night. 11 from Dad, 15 from Mom, 11 from Ethan. I scrolled briefly, catching words like betrayal, selfish, disappointment. Then another word, softer, from my mother, family. It was a word she wielded like a weapon, not a comfort. Family, to her, meant sacrifice, meant submission, meant erasing myself to keep the machine running. For years, I believed her definition. I believed being family meant being needed. That my worth was measured in how much I could give before I collapsed. Now I wasn't so sure. I locked the phone again and left it face down. I wouldn't let their words define me, not today. By midday, I decided to go for a walk. The sky was pale blue, streaked with thin clouds. I took the long way to the market, passing streets I rarely visited. Storefronts displayed mannequins in bright dresses, stacks of books, fresh fruit arranged in perfect pyramids. For once, I let myself really look, without rushing past. I paused in front of a bookstore. A sign in the window read, "Summer Reading Sale." I hesitated at the door, guilt pressing faintly at the edges of my mind. Then I pushed it open. The air inside was cool, carrying the scent of paper and ink, comforting and alive. Rows of books stretched before me, endless possibilities. I wandered the aisles slowly, fingertips brushing spines. When was the last time I bought a book for myself? I couldn't remember. Most of my money had vanished into bills and repairs, into things that broke again, into groceries I never ate because someone else got there first. I stopped at a table stacked with novels. One cover caught my eye, a story set in Maine, the kind of quiet coastal place I had once daydreamed about but never spoken aloud. I picked it up, the weight of it solid in my hands. I carried it to the counter, my heart racing like I was committing a crime. The cashier smiled as she scanned it. "Good choice." I paid in cash, slipped the book into my bag, and walked out into the sunlight. The guilt lingered, but beneath it something else stirred. Joy. Back home, I curled on the couch with the book and read for hours. The words carried me far from the cramped apartment and the demands of my family. I imagined myself walking along rocky shores, breathing salt air, hearing waves crash against cliffs. For the first time, escape felt tangible. Not just something I fantasized about on late nights when exhaustion blurred my vision. Something real, something possible. The thought frightened me, but it also filled me with light. That evening, I cooked dinner for one. Not the rushed, half-hearted meals of frozen leftovers I had grown used to, but something deliberate. Fresh vegetables sautéed with herbs, rice simmered until soft, a small piece of fish seared golden in the pan. I set the table with a plate, a fork, a glass of water, and lit the candle I had been saving since last Christmas. The flame flickered steadily as I sat down. The food smelled rich, the colors bright. I took a bite slowly, tasting every detail. I realized with a start that this was the first real meal I had cooked just for myself in years. I chewed and swallowed, and the taste of it was freedom. The phone rang again as I washed the dishes. I let it go unanswered, the sound fading into nothing. Later, I checked the voicemail. My mother's voice, soft but strained. "Juliet, please, we need to talk. Your father is worried. Ethan is upset. This family cannot survive without you. Call me back." Her words twisted in my chest, but I caught the truth inside them. This family cannot survive without you, not because I was loved, because I was needed, because I was the scaffolding holding up a structure too broken to stand on its own. I deleted the voicemail. That night, I dreamed of water. The river, the ocean, something vast and untouchable. In the dream, I was walking along the shore with no one behind me, no one calling my name, no one demanding. Just the sound of waves and the rhythm of my own footsteps. I woke with tears in my eyes but a strange peace in my chest. The morning light painted gold across my walls. I stretched, my body heavy but rested. I looked at the spreadsheet still taped above my desk. For months, it had been my proof, my anchor to remind me I wasn't imagining the weight. Now I realized I didn't need it anymore. I already knew the truth. I pulled it down carefully, folded it, and tucked it into the back of my notebook. Not as a weapon, not as evidence, but as a reminder of where I had been and why I couldn't go back. Days passed, each one carrying me further from the life I had left. The messages kept coming, though I read fewer of them now. Their words grew sharper, desperate, filled with accusations. I stopped answering entirely. Instead, I walked more. I bought fresh flowers for my windowsill. I started cooking small meals with care. I slept. I read. Slowly, I began to feel like a person again, not just a function, not just an ATM with a heartbeat. One evening, as I sat by the window sipping tea, I wrote another line in my notebook. 6. Plan a trip. The idea frightened me, but it also thrilled me. A place with no ties, no obligations, no voices demanding more. A place that was mine. I thought of Maine again, of cliffs and waves and air that smelled of salt. I didn't know when or how, but I knew one day I would go. And when I did, I wouldn't be running away. I would be going toward myself. The first week after I left my parents' house passed in a blur of silence and small routines. Each day I felt myself loosening, my breath deeper, my shoulders lighter. Yet silence also carried danger. It made space for memories I had tried to bury, memories that rose without permission. One morning, as I folded laundry in the small apartment, the smell of detergent carried me backward in time. I was 12 again, kneeling on the floor of our old laundry room. My mother had handed me a pile of bills, her face weary, her voice soft but insistent. She told me she was tired, that she could not handle it all alone, that I was the responsible one. I remember sitting there, spreading out envelopes across the linoleum floor, trying to make sense of numbers and dates I barely understood. I remember her patting my head as if my effort was enough to save her. That was the first time I felt the weight of duty settle into my chest. The memory lingered as I shook out a clean shirt and laid it flat. Even then, even at 12, I learned the lesson. My value came from fixing what they broke. Later that day, I took a walk through the market. The smells of ripe fruit and freshly baked bread floated through the air. I stopped at a stall selling peaches, their skin flushed with color. I picked one up, the fuzz soft against my fingers. When I bit into it, juice ran down my hand. The sweetness startled me. It had been years since I let myself enjoy something so simple without thinking of cost or consequence. As I wiped my hand on a napkin, another memory arrived. 16 years old, standing at the checkout with a bag of groceries. I had just finished my shift at the store where I worked after school. Mom had overdrawn her account again, and the lights were at risk of being shut off. I pulled cash from my pocket and handed it over. That night she kissed my forehead and said, "You're such a good girl. You'll always take care of us." At the time, I thought it was love. Now, I know it was prophecy. I wandered the market until the sun began to dip. The crowd thinned and vendors started closing up. I walked home with my small bag of fruit and bread, and in the quiet of my apartment, I ate a peach slowly, tasting it fully, telling myself this was allowed. That night, I sat with my notebook again. The list I had written earlier stared up at me, 5 simple lines of freedom. I added another: forgive yourself for surviving. I wasn't sure what I meant yet, but the words felt right. For so long, I had carried shame like an anchor, convinced I wasn't enough, that I failed if I couldn't fix everything. But survival was not failure. Survival was proof. Sleep came late. Memories circled me, pulling me backward. I dreamed of being 18, graduation day. While others celebrated, my parents handed me another list of bills, their faces already expectant. I had smiled weakly, handed over part of my gift money, and told myself it was fine. I told myself family meant sacrifice. I woke in the early hours, sweat damp on my skin, my breath uneven. The city outside was still, the streetlight casting pale light through the blinds. I sat up, drank water, and whispered to myself, "You're not there anymore. You're here." It took several breaths before I believed it. The next afternoon, I cleaned the apartment thoroughly. Not because I had to, not because anyone was watching, but because it felt good. I opened the windows wide and let the air flow through. I scrubbed the counters, wiped the floors, folded the blankets. Each act was mine alone, chosen, not demanded. The space glowed when I finished, simple but wholly mine. I made tea and sat by the window as the sun dropped lower. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. Instead, I thought of my childhood room. The posters I never chose. The way Ethan would borrow my things without asking. The way my father would barge in to tell me to quiet down even when I was just reading. That room had never felt like mine, not truly. My apartment now was small, the walls plain, but it belonged to me in a way that house never had. Another memory surfaced, uninvited. I was 21, working 2 jobs to pay for classes while still living at home. Ethan had racked up overdraft fees on his account. My father yelled, my mother cried, and somehow the solution fell to me. I drained half of my savings to clear his debt. No one thanked me. Instead, my mother smiled in relief and handed me another list of errands. I had laughed, pretending it was fine, pretending I wasn't breaking inside. I pressed my palm flat against the cool glass of the window, grounding myself in the present. That was then. This was now. Over the following days, more memories rose, each one a crack in the foundation of my family. Each one proof that my role had been written long before I was old enough to challenge it. I began writing them down in the notebook, one by one, not as confessions but as acknowledgments. 16, paid the electric bill. 19, bought Ethan his phone. 23, covered Dad's prescriptions. 28, sent monthly transfers for the mortgage I never saw. The list grew long, but instead of crushing me, it clarified something. The weight was never mine to carry. At night, I lit the candle again. Its small flame steadied me. I thought about how they might be reacting now, scrambling, accusing, blaming. I thought about my father's voice, sharp with disappointment. I thought about my mother's sighs, her guilt-woven pleas. I thought about Ethan's scorn. And for the first time, I realized I could imagine them clearly without feeling responsible. Their voices were theirs. Their choices were theirs. I didn't have to answer. The candle flame danced and steadied, and so did I. One evening, I received a long email from my mother. Her words filled the screen, winding from guilt to anger to despair. She reminded me of birthdays I had forgotten, favors I had denied, moments she claimed proved I was ungrateful. She wrote that family should never need a contract, that I should give because love demands it. I read every word, then closed the email. My reply was silence. Instead, I went for a walk. The night air was crisp, and the streets were lined with glowing windows. Behind one, I saw a family gathered around a dinner table, their laughter spilling out faintly into the night. I paused, watching. For a moment, jealousy pricked my chest. But then I realized I wasn't jealous of them. I was simply acknowledging what I had always wanted and never had. That longing was mine, but the absence of it was not my fault. I walked on, the sound of my steps steady on the pavement. Back in my apartment, I brewed tea and wrote again in my notebook. I added a new line to the list: stop measuring your worth by what you give. The words sank into me. They didn't erase the past, but they lit the path forward. Sleep came easier that night. When I dreamed, I was walking along a shoreline again, waves rolling steady, air sharp with salt. This time, I wasn't alone. My reflection walked beside me, matching my steps. And for the first time, I smiled at her. I woke with the sun warming my face, the city humming softly outside. I stretched, feeling the weight of the past still present but lighter shifting. The cracks from my past were no longer traps. They were reminders that I had survived, and that survival was not the same as living. And I was ready, slowly, to live. The second week after leaving stretched longer than the first. In some ways, it was easier. I no longer startled every time the phone buzzed. I no longer felt that reflexive urge to answer immediately, to soothe, to fix. But in other ways, the quiet pressed harder. It forced me to sit with memories I had buried, to face truths I had long pretended were not there. One evening, I stood at the stove stirring lentils in a pot, the aroma of garlic and cumin filling the apartment. The steam fogged my glasses. I closed my eyes and inhaled, allowing myself to enjoy the simple act of cooking. Then, out of nowhere, a memory snapped across me like a whip. I was 19, exhausted after a closing shift at the grocery store. My father had waited up, his face grim. He told me the car insurance was overdue and that if I truly cared about the family, I would help. I had been too tired to fight. I pulled out my card and paid the balance. I remember the way he nodded, satisfied, as if I had passed some unspoken test. He never said thank you. The memory left a bitter taste that clashed with the scent of garlic. I turned off the stove and sat at the table, staring at the flame of the candle I had lit. Back then, I told myself sacrifice was proof of love. But the older I grew, the more I realized it was not love they wanted from me. It was compliance. The phone buzzed on the counter. I didn't move. It rang until the sound cut off. I sipped water and told myself I was still here, still free, still allowed. Later that night, I pulled out my notebook. The list of memories had grown long. I flipped through the pages and added another line: 19, paid car insurance. As I wrote, I realized the notebook was becoming something more than a record. It was a map. A map of how I had been shaped, of the invisible walls that had closed around me. And by writing them down, I was dismantling those walls one memory at a time. The next morning, I walked to a small bakery I had passed many times but never entered. The smell of fresh bread drifted into the street. Inside, the display glowed with golden loaves, croissants, rolls dusted with flour. I ordered a small loaf and a cup of coffee. When I sat by the window with my breakfast, sunlight spilled across the table. The bread was warm, the butter melting into it. I bit into it and felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from the strange joy of doing something only for myself. I remembered being 22, coming home from a shift at the bookstore where I had worked weekends to make ends meet. I had carried a bag of pastries I had bought with my discount. Ethan had grabbed 2 before I even sat down. Mom had sighed about sugar. Dad had asked if I had saved any money for the electric bill. I had taken the smallest pastry for myself, eating quietly while the rest disappeared. This morning in the bakery, no one reached for my food. No one sighed. No one asked for anything. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. The days began to form a rhythm. Work, walk, cook, write. Each day carried small acts of rebellion that I clutched tightly, buying flowers for the window, reading late into the night, taking the long route home just because I could. Yet beneath the rhythm, the memories kept rising. One night, I dreamed I was back in my old room. The walls were lined with boxes, each one labeled with a bill I had paid: water, rent, insurance, groceries. The boxes stacked higher until they pressed against the ceiling. I tried to climb them, but they collapsed, burying me. I woke gasping, heart pounding, sheets damp with sweat. I sat by the window until dawn, watching the skylight. My notebook lay open on the table. I added another line, dreamed of boxes, felt buried. Then I wrote, not my weight anymore. The act of writing it down loosened the tightness in my chest. On Sunday afternoon, my phone rang again. This time I answered. My mother's voice came sweet, stretched thin with desperation. Juliet, your father and I are worried. We don't understand why you're doing this. You've always been the dependable one. We thought we could count on you. The words twisted like barbed wire. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, waiting for the wave of guilt to crush me. But instead, another memory surfaced. I was 24, sick with the flu, fever burning through me. I had called Mom for help. She had sighed and said she was too busy, then asked if I could transfer money for Ethan's new laptop. That was when I understood what dependable meant in this family. It meant I was allowed to give but never to need. Mom, I said softly into the phone, you never counted on me. You used me. That's not the same. Her sharp intake of breath was the last thing I heard before I hung up. My hand trembled as I set the phone down, but my chest felt lighter. The silence that followed was different. Not fragile this time, but firm. That evening, I cooked lemon pasta with herbs. I poured a glass of wine and lit the candle. I ate slowly, savoring every bite. Each act was deliberate, each one mine. I thought again of the shoreline in my dreams, of the version of me who walked there freely. She was waiting for me. I was walking toward her. The next day, I added another line to my notebook. Stop apologizing for needing space. By the end of the week, my notebook was filled with cracks from the past, each one marked and named. 16, paid utilities. 19, car insurance. 21, Ethan's overdraft. 23, prescriptions. 28, mortgage transfers. On the last page, I wrote one sentence in bold letters. None of this was love. When I closed the notebook, I felt the shift inside me. The past was still mine, but it no longer controlled me. I sat by the window, the sun low, the air cool against my skin. The rosemary plant I had bought at the market was sprouting new leaves. I crushed one gently between my fingers, inhaling its sharp, fresh scent. The future felt uncertain, but in that moment I understood something important. The cracks in the past were not just breaks. They were openings, and through them, I was finally stepping out. The third week after I left slid into being with less resistance than I expected. Silence was no longer fragile. It had become something I carried with me like a second skin. I woke in the mornings without dread. I made coffee, opened the window, listened to the hum of the city. It was strange to realize how much of my life had been built around bracing myself. Now my body felt different, less like a wall holding back a flood, more like a body simply living. Workdays passed quietly. I answered emails, attended meetings, finished projects, and for the first time, I didn't resent my job. The office had once felt like a second burden layered on top of the first, a place I endured so I could keep everyone else afloat. Now it felt almost manageable. When I left at the end of the day, I left clean. I wasn't rushing to the store for someone else's list. I wasn't calculating how much of my paycheck I could give away. I walked home with my own thoughts, free to stop anywhere I pleased. One evening, I stopped at a flower shop on the corner. Buckets of tulips spilled onto the sidewalk in red and yellow bursts. I bought a small bunch and carried them home, their scent delicate in the air. I placed them in a glass on the table and felt the room bright. That night, as I ate a simple meal, the flowers glowed in the candlelight. They reminded me that beauty didn't have to be earned. It could simply exist. But even as I settled into this rhythm, ghosts tugged at me. Sometimes at night, I still dreamed of my father's voice, sharp and cold. Sometimes I woke with the weight of obligation pressing on my chest, forgetting for a moment that I had stepped away. The body remembers what the mind tries to unlearn. One morning, on my way to work, my phone buzzed. I had kept notifications off, but I still checked now and then against my better judgment. The latest text was from Ethan. No greeting, no context, just a line, "You ruined everything." I stared at the words on the screen. They were meant to pierce me, to summon guilt. But instead, I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, only recognition. This was who he was. This was what they thought of me. A resource cut off, a faucet turned dry. I slipped the phone back into my bag and kept walking. The air was crisp, the breeze brushing cool against my face. For the first time, his words didn't sink into me. They stayed outside like rain on glass. That evening, I wrote another line in my notebook. Their voices are not my truth. I underlined it twice. The days lengthened into small pleasures. I cooked lentil soup and shared it with a neighbor down the hall who had held the door for me one morning. We ate together in my apartment, the conversation easy, unburdened by history. She told me about her childhood in another city, her dreams of opening a cafe. I listened, surprised at how natural it felt to talk to someone without calculation, without fear of what they might demand. When she left, I washed the dishes with music playing softly in the background. I looked around my apartment, warm with candlelight and the scent of rosemary, and I felt a sense of home I had never known in the house where I grew up. One Saturday, I wandered through the farmer's market. Stalls stretched with fresh vegetables, jars of honey, handmade soaps. I bought a small rosemary plant for the windowsill. Its scent was sharp, grounding. As I carried it home, I thought about roots. The plant had been pulled from soil, potted, and now it would grow in my window. It would adapt. So would I at night. I sometimes scrolled back through old messages from my family. Not because I missed them, but because I wanted to see them clearly. The thread stretched back years, filled with requests, complaints, and rare, thin praise. Looking at them with distance, I saw the pattern more starkly. They had never seen me. They had seen only what I could provide. I closed the messages and wrote in my notebook, I am not their backup plan. Toward the end of the third week, a letter arrived in my mailbox. The envelope was thin, official-looking, with my parents' address printed as the return. I almost tossed it aside unopened, but something stopped me. I carried it inside, sat at the table, and slid a finger under the flap. Inside was a notice from the bank. Words like delinquent, default, and foreclosure leapt off the page. My name was not on the deed, but somehow the letter had found its way to me. My chest tightened as I read. For months, I had been sending money to cover the mortgage. I thought I was saving the house. But here it was in black and white, final notice. I sat still for a long time, the letter trembling slightly in my hands. My first thought was disbelief. My second was anger. And then came clarity. The money had not gone where they said it would. It had gone elsewhere. I folded the letter and set it on the table. My heart was steady, my breath even. The truth settled into me, cold but clear. They hadn't needed me as a daughter. They had needed me as a system. And that system had just broken. The letter stayed on my table for 3 days before I could bring myself to read it again. Each time I walked past, the envelope seemed to whisper, pulling at me. The first night, I tucked it under a book, as if hiding it could change the truth. The second day, I carried it to my desk and almost tore it in half, but stopped with the paper trembling in my hands. On the third evening, I sat with it in the candlelight and forced myself to look at the words once more. Delinquent, default, final notice. Each word burned through me. I had sent them hundreds every month. Enough to cover the mortgage, enough to keep the roof secure. I remembered the way my father's voice would harden if the money was late, the way my mother's sighs would wrap around me like chains. I remembered the text messages, urgent and desperate, telling me how close they were to losing everything. And yet here it was, proof in ink, that everything I gave had gone somewhere else. I pushed the paper aside and rested my forehead on the table. Anger rose hot in my chest, mingled with a familiar ache. For years, I had bent myself into pieces to keep them safe, to keep the house standing. I had convinced myself that my sacrifice meant something, but the house had been crumbling all along. I thought about Ethan, about his sudden new clothes, his shiny gadgets, his endless excuses. I thought about my father's unexplained purchases, the way he dismissed my questions. I thought about my mother's evasions, her carefully chosen words. The pattern was too clear to ignore. My money had never gone to the mortgage. It had gone to them, to their comforts, to their choices, to their silence. I stood abruptly and crossed the room. The air felt too tight, the walls pressing in. I opened the window and leaned out, letting the city noise wash over me. Cars rolled past below, voices drifted from the street. For a moment, I envied the strangers walking freely, unburdened by secrets they didn't ask for. When I pulled back inside, the letter still sat on the table, stark and undeniable. I lit the candle beside it and whispered aloud, "They lied." The words hung in the air, heavier than smoke. The phone calls began again that week, more insistent than before. My father's number flashed first. I ignored it. Then Ethan, then my mother. At last, a voicemail arrived. "Juliet, we know you got the letter. It's not what it looks like. Call us back so we can explain." But they never explained, not really. I played the voicemail again, listening carefully. My mother's tone wasn't one of apology. It was control disguised as pleading. Not what it looks like. A phrase meant to erase the truth. I deleted it without saving. That night, I dreamed of the house again. This time I walked through the hallway and the walls were hollow, cardboard dressed up as wood. Each door opened into emptiness, rooms without floors, staircases that led nowhere. I woke with my heart pounding and knew the dream was not just imagination. It was recognition. The house had never been solid. I had only believed it was because I had been told so. One evening after work, I sat with my notebook and flipped through the pages. Each memory, each sacrifice, each line I had written stared back at me. For the first time, they formed a pattern so clear I couldn't unsee it. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate. They had let me believe my money kept the family afloat when in truth it had been siphoned away. I wrote across the page in large letters. They built comfort on my silence. The words cut sharp, but they steadied me. Naming it made it real. As I closed the notebook, my phone buzzed again. This time, a message from Ethan. "You owe us." 2 words, cold and sharp, like a knife pressed to my ribs. I stared at the screen until my hands shook. Not once in my life had I heard him say thank you. Not once had he acknowledged what I gave. And now, even with everything stripped bare, he could only see me as a debt to be collected. I locked the phone and shoved it into a drawer. I refused to carry his voice in my pocket anymore. The next weekend, I walked along the river again. The current shimmered under the sunlight, carrying fragments of light across its surface. People strolled past, couples, children, runners, each absorbed in their own lives. I stopped on the bridge, gripping the railing. The water below moved steadily, unbothered by the chaos of the city above. I thought about how much of my life had been spent trying to dam the current of my family's needs, piling myself like stones against the flow. No wonder I felt eroded. No wonder I felt hollow. But now, as I watched the water move freely, I realized something. Maybe it wasn't my job to hold back their river. Maybe it never had been. I whispered into the wind, not mine to hold. The words were small, but saying them felt like unclenching a fist I had carried for decades. The following Monday, I received another letter. This one from Ethan. His handwriting scrawled across the envelope, sharp and uneven. Inside was a note that read, "If you don't come back, we all lose everything." I stared at the paper until the words blurred. The manipulation was blunt now, stripped of sweetness. He wasn't asking. He was commanding. My breath quickened, but then steadied. I folded the note and placed it beside the bank letter. 2 pieces of proof, 2 pieces of the truth. I didn't reply. Instead, I returned to my notebook and added another line. Their collapse is not my responsibility. I underlined it 3 times. One night, unable to sleep, I pulled out the spreadsheet I had folded away. The numbers glared back at me, each line a record of what I had given. I ran my finger down the column of totals and whispered, "It was enough." My voice cracked. It had always been enough. The problem was never me. I slid the spreadsheet into the notebook, tucking it between the pages. This time it wasn't evidence for them. It was evidence for me. Evidence that I had carried more than anyone should, and that I had been deceived into believing it was love. As I closed the book, a strange calm settled over me. The storm was still circling, but for the first time, I felt a center within myself that it could not touch. By the end of the month, the calls slowed. Not because they had given up, but because they had shifted strategy. My mother's messages grew shorter, sharper. My father's silence became its own form of noise. Ethan's words turned into threats wrapped in obligation, but my silence remained louder. I kept cooking, walking, writing. I kept filling my apartment with small pieces of beauty. I kept breathing into the space that was finally mine. And every time I glanced at the bank letter on the table, I reminded myself, the truth was here now. I didn't need to run from it. They had lied. They had built their comfort on my silence, and the silence was gone. The 4th month of my new life began with an unexpected quiet. My family had not called for a week, not a single message, not even Ethan's crude demands. At first, the silence unsettled me. I kept expecting the phone to buzz, expecting the mailbox to hold another letter. But when nothing came, I realized something I had never allowed myself to believe before. Their silence was not peace, it was distance, and distance was survival. I began to fill the space they had left with my own choices. At work, I spoke up more in meetings. For years I had kept my head down, convinced I could not afford to take risks. My salary had been siphoned away too quickly to matter, so ambition had felt pointless. Now, with my paycheck belonging only to me, I felt a spark I had almost forgotten. I volunteered for a new project, one that required creativity and leadership. My manager raised an eyebrow, surprised at my confidence, but she handed me the assignment. Walking back to my desk, I felt my pulse quicken, not from fear, but from excitement. Evenings became my own small celebrations. I cooked meals with care, experimenting with spices, learning to trust my palate. I bought fresh flowers every week and let their colors change the mood of my apartment. I started keeping a small journal separate from the notebook of memories, one that held plans instead of pain. In its pages, I sketched out ideas for trips I wanted to take, books I wanted to read, skills I wanted to learn. One Saturday, I signed up for a painting class at a local community center. I had never painted before, not really, but something inside me craved the freedom of color. The first class was small, only 6 of us gathered around easels. The teacher encouraged us to let go of perfection, to move the brush without fear. At first, my strokes were stiff, self-conscious. But as the hour passed, the canvas began to fill with shapes and shades that surprised me. Not beautiful, not polished, but mine. When I stepped back, I laughed softly, a sound that startled me with its ease. That night, as I washed the paint from my hands, I thought about how long it had been since I tried something purely for joy. It was like touching a part of myself I had abandoned years ago. Yet even as my life widened, shadows still lingered. Some nights I woke with dreams of my father's voice booming through the walls, dreams of Ethan's smirk, dreams of my mother's sighs that felt heavier than any scream. I would sit by the window, breathing in the city air, telling myself again and again, I am here, not there. One evening after painting class, I found a letter slipped under my apartment door. No envelope, just folded paper. My hands shook as I opened it. The handwriting was Ethan. The words were short, "You think you can run, you can't." I stood frozen in my hallway, the letter burning in my hand. My first instinct was panic. Had he been here? Did he know where I lived? I checked the locks twice, closed the blinds, sat with my back against the door. My breath came shallow, my chest tight. For hours I couldn't move. But as midnight neared, anger rose through the fear. He wanted me paralyzed. He wanted me afraid. For years, that had been his power. And for years, I had given it to him. But this was my space, my apartment, my life. I folded the letter carefully and slid it between the pages of my notebook, not as a threat but as evidence. Proof of who they were, proof of what I had escaped. The next morning, I walked to the police station. My hands trembled as I held the letter out to the officer at the desk. I expected him to dismiss me, to tell me it was nothing. Instead, he read the words, his face steady. He asked questions. He filed a report. I walked out with a copy in my hand and a strange mixture of relief and fear in my chest. That evening, I lit a candle and sat at my table with the report beside me. The flame flickered steady. I whispered to myself, "You are not powerless anymore." And for the first time, I believed it. Work grew busier with the new project. I spent late hours in the office, brainstorming, drafting proposals, presenting ideas. My colleagues began to look at me differently, not as the quiet worker in the corner, but as someone capable of leading. The recognition both thrilled and frightened me. I wasn't used to being seen. But slowly, I let myself accept it. One Friday, after a long presentation, my manager pulled me aside. She smiled and said, "You're good at this, Juliet. You should trust yourself more." The words lingered with me all evening. I carried them home like a fragile treasure. That night, I wrote in my new journal, "Trust yourself." It felt like planting a seed. The following weekend, I met a few classmates from painting for coffee. We sat in a small cafe, our canvases stacked against the wall, laughter spilling over the table. They asked about my work, my hobbies, my dreams. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure how much of myself to reveal. But then I let the words come. I told them I wanted to travel, to see the ocean cliffs of Maine, to paint landscapes, to write stories. Their eyes lit with encouragement, not judgment. Walking home afterward, I felt lighter than I had in years. Friendship, even in its earliest form, felt like a possibility I had forgotten was real. But when I reached my apartment, a chill ran through me. The mailbox door was open, hanging crooked. Inside, another folded note. My stomach clenched as I pulled it out. The handwriting again was Ethan's. This time the words read, "We know you've got more money. Don't make us come find you." I sat on the steps, the paper trembling in my hand. Fear twisted through me, but beneath it something harder stirred. For years they had taken and taken, their demands endless, their threats unspoken. Now the mask was gone. Now the truth was plain. I tore the note in half, then in quarters, then in pieces so small they fluttered like confetti into the trash. My body still shook, but my heart felt steadier. Their reach might find me, but their hold was breaking. That night I wrote in bold letters across my notebook, "I am not their prey." The flame of the candle flickered tall, as if in agreement. The days after Ethan's second note felt heavier, though I forced myself to keep moving forward. At work, I poured myself into the project, staying late to refine presentations, guiding my small team through long brainstorming sessions. My colleagues began looking to me naturally, waiting for me to speak, relying on me to steady the group. For years, my reliability had been siphoned into my family's endless demands. Now, for the first time, it was being recognized, rewarded, and valued on my own terms. But when I came home, the quiet often bristled with unease. I double-checked the locks each night, glanced over my shoulder when I walked up the stairwell. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps lingering behind me, but when I turned, the hallway was empty. My pulse raced faster than reason, and yet I could not shake the feeling that Ethan was closer than I wanted to believe. One evening, as I left the office after dark, I noticed a figure across the street leaning against a lamppost. The body was half hidden in shadow, but the posture struck me. Familiar, lazy, a slouch I had seen my brother wear countless times. My chest tightened, breath sharp. I walked quickly toward the subway entrance, heart pounding. When I looked back, the figure was gone. I told myself it was paranoia, but the chill in my bones whispered otherwise. That night I dreamed of being cornered in the old family kitchen, Ethan blocking the doorway, his voice mocking, his hands rifling through my bag for money. I woke gasping, the darkness pressing close around me. I lit the candle and sat upright until the flame calmed my breath. I wrote in my notebook, "His shadow is not my reality." The next morning, I bought a second lock for the apartment door and installed it myself. The metallic click of it sliding into place felt like armor. Still, fear lingered, so I forced myself to lean harder into the life I was building. I attended painting class religiously, letting color and motion pull me away from dread. I met my classmates for coffee again, and we laughed over our clumsy brushstrokes and uneven lines. Their company felt like a tether to something brighter, proof that connection could exist without strings of obligation. One of them, a woman named Clara, invited me to a small gathering at her apartment. I hesitated, my instinct to retreat whispering at me, but I went. The evening was filled with warmth and conversation, the clink of glasses, the soft hum of music. I told a story from my childhood that I had never shared with anyone before, about sneaking away to the library when I was 15, hiding in the stacks for hours just to read in peace. They listened with curiosity, not judgment, and for once I felt my past could exist without being used against me. When I left, Clara hugged me goodbye and said, "I'm glad you're here." The words echoed in my mind as I walked home, softer than any demand, stronger than any manipulation. I realized then how starved I had been for simple acceptance. Back in my apartment, I wrote in my journal, "Belonging is possible." The following week at work, my manager praised me again during a team meeting. She said my leadership had shifted the project in the right direction, that my perspective brought clarity. The recognition filled me with a quiet pride. After the meeting, a colleague suggested I consider applying for a promotion in the coming months. The idea startled me, but it didn't feel impossible. For the first time, the future stretched forward with paths that belonged to me, not ones carved out by obligation. Yet even as hope widened, the threats persisted. Another note appeared under my door, scrawled hastily in Ethan's hand. "You think this ends with you walking away? Think again." I held the paper over the sink and burned it, watching the flames curl the edges, the ash fall into the basin. My body shook, but not from fear alone. It was rage now, raw and unflinching. They wanted me small, cornered, trembling, but I was learning to grow tall in my own space. That night, I made a choice. I called the officer who had filed my first report and updated him on the second note. His calm voice reassured me, and though he said it was difficult to prove, he encouraged me to document everything. I wrote down the dates, the words, the details. This time, I was not only surviving, I was building evidence. The next weekend, Clara and another classmate convinced me to join them on a short day trip to a nearby town. We wandered through cobblestone streets, browsed small shops, ate sandwiches on a bench by the water. The air smelled of salt and fresh bread, and for the first time in a long while, I laughed until my stomach ached. The laughter startled me. It felt foreign, fragile, but also real. I realized how much of myself had been buried under duty. Each smile now felt like digging something precious out of the rubble. That evening, exhausted but lighter, I sat at my window with a cup of tea. The city glowed in the distance, lights winking against the dark. I thought about the house I had left behind, the walls that had suffocated me, the endless lists of bills and demands. And then I thought about this new life, the flowers on my table, the friendships forming, the work that felt meaningful. The contrast was stark, undeniable. I whispered aloud, almost a vow, I will not go back, but the threats were not done. A week later, I came home to find my door scratched, shallow grooves near the lock. Panic surged through me, but then anger steadied it. I called the police immediately, filed another report, spoke with my landlord about security cameras. Each step felt like a declaration, I will not be intimidated. That night, sleep came late. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the city, the faint creak of the building. But instead of drowning in fear, I reminded myself of the truth. They had lied to me for years, they had built comfort on my silence, and now they were desperate because the silence was gone. Their desperation was not my burden. It was their consequence. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror before leaving for work. I studied my face, the lines of exhaustion softening, the spark in my eyes returning. For years, I had seen myself only as a reflection of their needs. Now, slowly, I was seeing myself as I was, flawed, scarred, but alive. On my way to the office, I stopped at the flower shop and bought a small bouquet of sunflowers. Their golden faces turned toward me as if in defiance of the shadows that lingered. I carried them proudly, unashamed of their brightness. That evening, as the candle flickered on my table, I wrote in bold letters in my notebook, "They cannot touch what I am becoming." And I believed it. The weeks following the scratches on my door settled into an uneasy calm. The police report and the new locks gave me a thin sense of protection, but I knew better than to believe the danger had vanished. Still, life went on. I worked, I painted, I shared coffee with Clara and the others. For the first time in years, I felt myself moving forward without dragging chains behind me. At work, the project I had taken on reached its peak. Long meetings, deadlines, endless revisions. I thrived in the rhythm of it. When the final presentation came, I stood at the front of the room, voice steady, slides clicking in time with my words. I could feel the attention on me, but for once it didn't feel like a trap. It felt like recognition. When we finished, the room erupted in applause. My manager caught my eye and smiled with pride. I walked back to my desk lightheaded, not with fear but with exhilaration. That evening, I treated myself to dinner out. A small Italian restaurant on the corner, candlelit tables, the scent of basil and garlic heavy in the air. I ordered pasta and a glass of red wine, savoring each bite slowly. Eating alone no longer felt like loneliness. It felt like agency. I was choosing my company, and for now, my own company was enough. Still, the silence from my family grew strange. Weeks passed with no calls, no messages, no notes slipped under my door. At first, I reveled in it. I thought maybe they had finally grown tired, maybe they had accepted that I was gone. But a deeper part of me knew silence was never their way. Silence was strategy. I wrote in my notebook, calm before storm. One Saturday afternoon, Clara invited me to join her at a flea market across town. Stalls sprawled under the open sky, filled with antiques, books, mismatched trinkets. I wandered among the tables, fingers brushing old photographs, worn coins, faded letters. At one stall, I found a box of used books. As I sorted through them, a man at the next table caught my eye. He was older, with gray at his temples, wearing a faded jacket. He nodded politely, and I nodded back. Then I froze. The bag he carried bore the logo of a bank, a familiar bank, the same one my parents had always used. It was nothing, I told myself. Coincidence. But the sight triggered something deep, a memory of standing in line at that very bank with my mother, her hand tight around my wrist, her voice sharp as she told me to stay quiet while she deposited the money I had given her. I shook it off and rejoined Clara, but the thought lingered. That night, back in my apartment, I pulled out the old bank letters I had saved. My fingers traced the logo. My chest tightened. The next morning, I did something I had avoided for years. I walked into a branch of that bank. The glass doors glinted in the sun, the lobby bright with sterile light. I approached the counter, heart hammering, and asked to review any accounts associated with my name. The clerk typed into her computer, brows furrowing. Then she looked up and told me softly that my name was listed as a cosigner on an account I didn't recognize. Confusion sliced through me. I asked to see a statement. She printed a page and slid it across the desk. My breath caught. The account was not for the mortgage. It was a separate account, opened years ago, and the deposits matched the amounts I had sent home. Line after line, month after month, my money had been funneled into it, but the withdrawals were not for bills or repairs. They were large, erratic, and often in Ethan's name. I gripped the paper, heat rising to my face. My stomach turned. All these years, I had believed I was keeping the house afloat. All these years, I had believed their words, their pleas, their sighs. And here was the truth, stark and undeniable. My sacrifices had not saved anything. They had funded something else entirely. The clerk's voice faded into background noise as I stared at the page. My pulse thundered in my ears. I thanked her numbly, folded the statement, and walked out into the sunlight that suddenly felt harsh and cold. Back in my apartment, I spread the paper on the table beside the candle, beside my notebook, beside the old spreadsheet. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't mismanagement. It was betrayal, orchestrated and deliberate. I whispered aloud to the empty room. They used me, not for survival, for themselves. The words landed heavy but clear, and with them came the sharp realization the worst part wasn't that they had lied. It was that I had believed them for so long. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the dark, the statement burning in my mind. I remembered every call, every demand, every time I drained my account to keep them standing, and now I knew the truth. They had been standing on my back not to survive, but to live easier while I broke. The silence in my apartment was deep but no longer fragile. It was the silence of truth revealed, of illusions shattered. The calm before the storm was over. And the storm was coming. The bank statement lay on my table like a wound. Each line of numbers cut deeper the longer I stared. My money, my years, my sacrifices, all siphoned away into an account I hadn't even known existed. And Ethan's name appeared over and over again, his withdrawals bold and careless, as though he had been reaching into my pockets without hesitation. That night, I barely slept. I drifted in and out of uneasy dreams, each one replaying the same story in different forms. In one, I was handing Ethan cash and watching him smile as the house behind us crumbled to dust. In another, my father took the bills from my hand, folded them neatly, and dropped them into a bottomless pit. My mother stood beside him, sighing, saying only, "This is family, Juliet, this is what love means." I woke with my sheets tangled, sweat damp on my skin, my chest aching with betrayal. The morning light felt too sharp, slicing across my apartment. I brewed coffee with hands that shook, the familiar scent offering little comfort. I carried the cup to my table and sat staring at the papers spread before me, the bank statement, the spreadsheet of years of payments, the old letter from the bank about the mortgage. Together, they told a story more brutal than any I had imagined. It wasn't carelessness. It wasn't simply a lack of gratitude. It was intentional. They had built a lie so complete that I had believed it was reality. I whispered to myself, they never needed saving. They needed feeding. The words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. Later that day, my phone rang. My father's name glowed on the screen. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but something inside me wanted to hear his voice now, to see how he would spin the truth. I answered. His tone was clipped, impatient. "Juliet, you've been digging where you shouldn't. That account is none of your business." My grip on the phone tightened. "None of my business? My name is on it." He hesitated, then sighed in that familiar way, the sound that had always made me feel guilty, small. "You don't understand the pressures we've faced. Your brother needed help. We all did. You're the one with stability. You're the one who could afford it." I closed my eyes. His words echoed the refrain of my entire life. You're the one who can handle it. You're the one who must. And yet, it had never been about survival. It had been about ease, about them living softer while I carried the weight. "I was never saving you," I said softly, almost to myself. "I was just being used," he bristled. "Don't be dramatic, family sacrifices, you'll understand one day." I hung up before he could finish. My hand shook as I set the phone down, but the shaking was not weakness, it was fury. The following evening, my inbox filled with emails. Ethan's words were jagged and raw. He accused me of betrayal, of selfishness, of abandoning them. He wrote that I had destroyed the family, that without me everything would collapse. He wrote that I owed them for everything they had ever given me. I stared at the screen, my hands cold. The lies were louder now, desperate. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote, "Truth is louder than their desperation." Days passed in a blur. At work, I held myself together, but the betrayal shadowed everything. During meetings, I found myself drifting, staring at my colleagues and wondering what it felt like to grow up without chains tied to your back. During painting class, my brush moved in harsh, dark strokes across the canvas. Clara asked if I was all right, and I forced a smile, saying only that it had been a long week. At night, I lit my candle and sat with the documents spread before me. I studied them like evidence at a trial, because that was what this was. A trial of truth, with me as both witness and victim. Each page was proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I hadn't exaggerated, that the years of exhaustion had been real and intentional. One afternoon, Clara stopped by unannounced. She carried a small cake from the bakery down the street. We sat together at my table, the candle burning between us, and she listened as I told her everything. The money, the lies, the account, the years of being drained. Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "They used you," she said firmly. "And you don't deserve it, you never did." The words cracked something inside me, and I felt tears rise. Not because of the betrayal, I had already wept for that, but because someone else finally saw it too. For so long, I had been trapped in their narrative, convinced my suffering was exaggerated, that I was dramatic, that I was selfish. Now, in Clara's voice, I heard validation, and it steadied me. That night, I wrote in bold letters, "I am not crazy, I am not selfish, I am not theirs." The next week, my father left me a voicemail. His voice was calm, rehearsed. "Juliet, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. You know we all depended on you, don't throw everything away now. Come home and we can fix this together." The word fix sent a shiver through me. For years, fix had been my command. Fix the bills. Fix Ethan's mistakes. Fix the chaos. Now, hearing it again, I realized he wasn't offering repair. He was demanding continuation. I deleted the voicemail and whispered to myself, "I am not their fix." The anger simmered, but beneath it, something else began to form. Resolve. For years, my silence had been their weapon. But now I had proof. Papers, statements, documents that told the truth they had tried to bury. I didn't know yet what I would do, but I knew one thing with certainty: I would not stay quiet anymore. That night, as the candle burned low, I made a decision. I would gather everything. Every spreadsheet, every letter, every bank statement. I would collect it all. And when the time was right, I would use it. Not just to free myself, but to end their hold forever. As I closed my notebook, the words I had written glowed in the flickering light. "I am not theirs." And for the first time, I felt the truth settle solid in my bones. The decision to gather everything was like striking a match inside me. For years, my family had convinced me that truth was slippery, that memory was unreliable, that I was dramatic or selfish whenever I questioned them. Now, with the bank statements, the letters, and my own careful notes, I knew better. I had evidence. I had clarity, and I would not let them erase it again. I spent the next week collecting every scrap I could find. Old receipts tucked in drawers, screenshots of transfers, even emails I had once ignored because the guilt in them was too heavy to read. I spread them across my table, page after page, a mosaic of my own history. The candle flickered at the center of it all, casting light on the story I had lived but never seen so clearly. Each page was a reminder, but also a weapon. At work, life continued. The project I had led finished with success, and my manager scheduled a one-on-one with me to discuss my future. She spoke about promotions, about leadership, about long-term vision. I listened, almost dazed. For so long, I had thought of myself only as a giver, a fixer, someone whose energy vanished into the void of other people's needs. Now, someone was telling me I had potential beyond that. Walking out of her office, I felt taller somehow, as though I had been given back inches of my own spine. In painting class, my brush strokes grew bolder. My classmates laughed when I splashed colors wildly, but they admired it too. Clara leaned close one evening and whispered, "You've changed since the first class. You're lighter." I smiled at her words, though inside I knew it was more than lightness. It was strength. But the shadows did not stay quiet for long. One night, I returned home to find another envelope under my door. This one was different, thicker, heavier. I picked it up with trembling hands and carried it inside. When I opened it, I found photocopies of my own bank transfers. My money, my name, my signatures. Scrawled across the top in Ethan's messy handwriting were the words, "You can't run from blood." My body went cold. How had he gotten these documents? Had he been inside my apartment? My mind raced, panic sharp in my chest. I double-checked the locks, pressed my back to the door, breathing fast. Then slowly, anger pushed its way through the fear. They wanted me terrified. They wanted me cornered. But instead of breaking me, the envelope only sharpened my resolve. I placed the photocopies beside my own evidence. Together, they told the same story, only from different angles. Proof of theft, proof of manipulation, proof of betrayal. The next morning, I returned to the police station with the new envelope. The officer listened carefully, took the papers, and made notes. His calm professionalism steadied me. When he promised to escalate the case if further threats appeared, I felt a small knot loosen in my chest. But I knew the real battle wasn't just legal. It was emotional. It was about no longer being theirs. Over the following days, their silence cracked. My phone buzzed with calls again. My mother's voice filled my voicemail with pleas. "Juliet, we're desperate. You know we can't survive without you. Please think about your family." I played it once, then deleted it. That evening, Clara joined me for dinner. We cooked together in my small kitchen, laughter mixing with the sound of sizzling vegetables. Afterward, we sat at the table, the candle burning low. I told her about the new threats, about the envelope, about my visit to the police. She listened, eyes steady, and then said, "You're doing the right thing. They can't keep you trapped forever." Her words settled into me like warmth. For so long, I had fought alone. Now I wasn't entirely alone anymore. The next week my father called. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity tugged at me. His voice was low, calm, almost coaxing. "Juliet, this has gone too far. You're tearing the family apart. Think about what you're doing." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone. "No," I said softly but firmly. "You're the ones who tore it apart. I just stopped holding it together." His silence on the other end was thick, then sharp with anger. "You'll regret this." I hung up before he could say more. My hands shook, but my chest felt stronger. Each time I spoke my truth, I felt another chain snap. That night, I wrote in bold letters in my notebook, "I will not regret freedom." At work, the sense of possibility grew. My colleagues congratulated me on the project, my manager asked me to mentor a new hire, and for the first time, I began to imagine a life built not on surviving but on thriving. The thought was terrifying and thrilling all at once. But at night, the weight of what was coming pressed close. I could feel it in the air, like electricity before a storm. They were desperate now. I had evidence. And soon, something would have to break. I sat by the window one evening, watching the city lights flicker, and whispered to myself, "The end is coming. But this time, it will be my ending, not theirs." And I knew then that I was ready. The air in my apartment felt charged after that last call with my father, as if his anger had seeped through the phone and clung to the walls. For a moment, I wanted to scrub everything clean, to wash away the residue of his voice. But instead, I lit my candle, sat at the table, and stared at the flame until the heat of his words burned out of me. The next day at work, my manager called me into her office again. She told me she wanted to nominate me for a leadership program, something that could open doors for promotion. I listened, stunned. For years, I had been invisible outside the walls of my family's demands. Now, here was someone seeing me clearly, not as a source of labor to be drained, but as someone capable, talented, deserving. When I left her office, I pressed a hand against my chest, feeling my heartbeat steady. This was mine. This recognition, this possibility, this future, it was all mine. I began to notice small changes in myself. I walked with my shoulders straighter. I spoke up in meetings without second-guessing my words. When my classmates in painting asked for my opinion, I gave it honestly, not timidly. Each time, I felt a small piece of my old self return, the version of me that had been buried beneath years of servitude. But my family's silence did not last. One evening, as I returned home from class, I found Ethan waiting at the corner of my street. His figure was unmistakable, slouched, hands in his pockets, eyes sharp. My stomach twisted, but I kept walking, my pace steady. He stepped forward, blocking my path. "You can't keep ignoring us," he said, his voice low and mocking. "You think you're free, but you're not. You owe us." I looked him in the eye, my pulse thundering. "I don't owe you anything," he smirked. "You've always owed us. Don't forget who gave you a family." The words stung, sharp as a knife. For years, that line had been their weapon. Family as a leash, family as a shackle. But tonight, something inside me shifted. I felt the weight of the bank statement in my bag, the memory of Clara's steady voice, the recognition from my manager. I was no longer the girl they could corner in hallways. "You didn't give me a family," I said quietly. "You gave me chains, and I've cut them." I stepped past him before he could reply. My legs shook, my breath came fast, but I kept walking until I reached my building. I locked the door behind me and slid down to the floor, shaking with adrenaline. But beneath the fear was something else, power. For the first time, I had faced him and spoken the truth without flinching. I wrote in my notebook, "I faced him, I didn't break." The next day, I told Clara what had happened. Her eyes darkened with anger. "You can't let him corner you again," she said. "If he shows up, call the police immediately. Promise me." I promised, though my voice shook. She placed a hand on mine and added, "You're not alone anymore." The words steadied me more than I expected. The following week, another letter arrived. This one was not handwritten but typed, as if to look official. It threatened legal action, claiming I had abandoned financial obligations to my family. My chest tightened as I read it, but when I looked closer, I saw the errors, misspelled words, dates that didn't align, vague threats with no basis. A performance, nothing more. I placed it with the other evidence, proof of desperation. At work, the leadership program nomination went through. My manager congratulated me, colleagues shook my hand, and for the first time I saw not just who I had been, but who I could become. That night, I treated myself to flowers again, this time lilies, their fragrance sweet and strong. I placed them in the center of my table, beside the candle, beside my growing stack of evidence. Beauty and truth, side by side. But the threats grew bolder. Late one night, I heard footsteps outside my door, slow and deliberate. I froze, listening as the handle jiggled softly. My heart hammered in my chest, but the second lock held. I called the police, voice trembling but clear. When the officers arrived, the hallway was empty, only faint scuff marks on the floor. They took my statement, promised to increase patrols. After they left, I sat in the dark with only the candle burning. Fear pressed against me, but I held on to the image of the officers writing notes, of Clara's voice telling me I wasn't alone, of my manager's words of recognition. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. The next morning, I made another decision. I began scanning all my evidence, every statement, every receipt, every threatening note, and backing it up online. If they destroyed the originals, the truth would still live. As the files uploaded, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For years, they had depended on my silence. Now, even if I said nothing, the proof would speak. One evening, Clara and I sat on the roof of her building, watching the city lights blink against the night. She asked me what I wanted, truly wanted, once this was over. The question startled me. For so long, my desires had been irrelevant, buried beneath obligation. I thought carefully before answering. I want peace, I said finally. I want mornings without dread, nights without fear. I want to stand on a shore somewhere, hear the ocean, and know I'm free. She smiled softly. You will. Her certainty warmed me. For the first time, I allowed myself to believe it too. As the week ended, I felt the tension coil tighter. My family's desperation was sharpening, their tactics more frantic, their threats more reckless. But I no longer felt like the girl who bent under their weight. I was gathering my strength, my truth, my evidence. I stood at my window one night, the candle flickering on the table behind me, the city stretching wide beyond the glass. My reflection looked back, steadier now, eyes fierce. I whispered to her, "The confrontation is coming." And she whispered back, "You're ready." The days leading up to the confrontation carried a strange weight, as if the air itself was holding its breath. I moved through my routines with care, coffee in the morning, long walks after work, painting class on Thursdays, flowers on Saturdays. But every moment felt taut, stretched thin by the knowledge of what was coming. My table had become an altar of truth. The candle at the center, the lilies still fresh in their vase, and around them the growing stack of evidence. Bank statements, receipts, threatening notes, the fake letter pretending to be legal, even copies of my own spreadsheets. I scanned each document, organized each file into folders, and backed it up twice. The truth no longer lived only in my apartment. It lived beyond me, untouchable. I could almost hear their voices when I looked at the papers. My mother's sighs, heavy and manipulative. My father's clipped tone, laced with authority. Ethan's sneers, his arrogance. For years, their voices had drowned out my own. Now the papers spoke louder than any of them. Still, fear pulsed through me at odd moments. On the subway ride home, I caught myself scanning the faces around me, searching for Ethan in the crowd. At night, I woke to the sound of footsteps in the hall, only to realize it was the neighbor coming home late. My body remembered what it meant to live under siege. But each time I grounded myself with the evidence, with the candle, with Clara's voice reminding me I was not alone. One evening, Clara came over for dinner. We ate pasta at my table, the candlelight soft between us. I showed her the organized folders on my laptop, the neat stacks of papers. She read through them silently, her brow furrowed, her lips pressed tight. When she finished, she looked at me with a fierceness I had not seen before. "They can't escape this," she said. "You've built a wall of truth they can't climb." Her certainty steadied me. I realized then that I wasn't just gathering evidence to defend myself. I was building a weapon, one that would finally cut through the lies they had spun for decades. The next day, my father called again. This time, I answered. "Juliet," he began, his voice softer than usual, almost gentle. Be reasonable. You're angry, I understand. But this digging through old papers, this talk of betrayal, it's unnecessary. We're family. We can fix this." The word fix made my stomach twist. I almost laughed at the irony. "You lied to me," I said calmly. "You took everything I gave and funneled it into a lie. I have the proof." He paused, then his voice hardened. "You don't know what you're talking about. Those accounts, those withdrawals, you don't understand the context." "I understand perfectly," I said, "and so will anyone else who sees these papers." Silence crackled on the line. Then his voice, sharp as glass, "If you take this outside the family, you'll regret it." I hung up before he could say more. My hands shook, but my chest felt steady. I lit the candle and whispered, "No more regrets." 2 nights later, I saw Ethan again. He was waiting outside my building, leaning against the wall, his eyes dark in the glow of the streetlight. My breath caught, but I forced myself to walk forward. "You've gone too far, Juliet," he said, stepping into my path. "You think you can destroy us with your little papers. Nobody will believe you. You'll only make yourself look crazy." For years, that word, crazy, had been their weapon of choice. Anytime I questioned, anytime I resisted, they painted me unstable. It had worked when I was younger, but not now. I pulled a folded copy of the bank statement from my bag and held it up to him. His eyes flicked over it, widening for just a moment before he sneered. "This doesn't prove anything," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "It proves enough," I replied. "And I have more. Every transfer, every withdrawal, all of it. I don't need your belief. The truth speaks for itself." I stepped past him, my shoulders tight but unbroken. When I reached my door, I locked it behind me and leaned against the wood, my breath shaking. But beneath the fear was something else: victory. For the first time, I had shown them I wasn't empty-handed. I wasn't just words. I had proof. That night, I wrote in bold letters, "They cannot erase me with lies anymore." As I closed the notebook, I realized something. This wasn't only about survival anymore. It was about ending the cycle, about tearing down the house of lies they had built on my back. And I knew the confrontation was no longer a question of if, but when. The storm had gathered. The lightning was ready. And I was holding the strike in my hands. The night before it all came to a head, I barely slept. My body tossed in restless waves, my mind circling the same images over and over: the papers on my table, Ethan's sneer under the streetlight, my father's threats, my mother's sighs. Each memory pressed against me like a tide, but at the center of it all burned the candle flame, steady and unshaken. I reminded myself that I wasn't walking into this empty-handed anymore. I had truth on my side, and truth was weightier than their lies could ever be. The next day began like any other. Coffee, a shower, a walk to the office. But beneath the rhythm of routine, I felt the coil of anticipation tightening. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. I was right. That evening, as I returned home, 3 figures waited outside my building. My father, my mother, and Ethan. My steps slowed, but I didn't stop. The sight of them together, a wall of accusation, would have once broken me. Now it only confirmed what I already knew: they were desperate. My father stepped forward first, his eyes sharp. "Juliet, enough games, we need to talk." My mother's voice followed, soft and trembling. "Please, darling, come with us. We can fix this. We can be a family again." And Ethan, leaning back with that same smirk I had seen my entire life, muttered, "You think you've won, but you're nothing without us." For a moment, fear rose in me, hot and quick. But then I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of papers. I held it firmly against my chest, my voice steady. "No," I said, "you're nothing without me, and I'm done." My father's jaw tightened. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. "For years, you drained me. You lied about the mortgage, you opened accounts in my name, you took every sacrifice and twisted it into your comfort, and I have proof, pages of it, enough to show the world what you've done." Their faces shifted as the words hit. My mother's eyes darted nervously. Ethan's smirk faltered just for a second. My father's expression hardened, but I saw the flicker of unease behind it. "You wouldn't dare," he said. I stepped closer, my voice low but sharp. "I already have. Copies are safe, backed up, out of your reach. If anything happens to me, if you so much as touch my door again, the truth will spread farther than you can stop." The silence that followed was heavy, crackling. I could almost hear the machinery of their lies grinding to a halt. Ethan broke it first, scoffing. "All this because you couldn't handle being part of the family. You always thought you were better than us." I shook my head slowly. "No, I thought I was responsible for you. I thought love meant emptying myself so you could thrive, but I was wrong. Love doesn't bleed someone dry. Love doesn't lie for years. Love doesn't steal." My mother reached out, her voice cracking. "Juliet, please, we did what we had to do. You don't understand how hard it's been," I pulled back. "I understand perfectly. You chose to use me. You chose to live easier while I broke myself keeping you afloat. And now you're angry because I finally stopped." Her hand dropped. My father's mouth tightened into a hard line. Ethan looked away, unable to meet my eyes. For the first time, I saw them clearly, not as giants towering over me, but as people, small and desperate, built on lies. I turned toward the door of my building, keys in hand. Before I stepped inside, I looked back one final time. "This is the last time you'll see me like this," I said. "I am not your fixer. I am not your scapegoat. I am not yours." And then I walked inside, the door closing behind me with a decisive click. Inside my apartment, I leaned against the door, breath shaking, tears burning my eyes. But these tears weren't of defeat. They were release. I had faced them, spoken the truth, and walked away standing. I lit the candle on my table, watching the flame rise tall. The papers lay neatly stacked beside it, my silent witnesses. I whispered aloud, "It's over." In the days that followed, they tried a few more times. Another letter, a message from an unknown number, but their words no longer pierced. They slid off me like water on glass. The power had shifted, and they knew it. At work, the leadership program began. I threw myself into it with focus, channeling the energy that had once gone into their endless demands. In painting class, my canvases grew bolder, brighter, filled with colors that pulsed with life. Clara stood beside me, her laughter soft, her presence steady. I found myself imagining a future not built on escape, but on possibility. One weekend, I finally booked a ticket. A short trip to the coast, just a few days, but enough. Enough to hear the ocean, to stand on a shore, to breathe salt air into my lungs and know that I had kept my promise to myself. When the day came, I stood at the edge of the sea, waves crashing against rocks, gulls crying overhead. The horizon stretched wide, endless, unbroken. I closed my eyes and listened to the roar of the water, steady and free. I thought of the little girl who once paid bills on the laundry room floor. I thought of the teenager who gave away her graduation money. I thought of the woman who walked out of a house that had never truly been her home. And then I thought of myself now, standing tall with the ocean before me and the truth behind me. I whispered into the wind, "You're free." And for the first time in my life, I believed it.